Hi everyone, David Aragona and Mike Beer here, taking a look at one of the undercard stakes on Risen Star Saturday at Fairgrounds. Race 11 is the Grade 3 Mineshaft. Do be aware before we get into the handicapping for this race, you can get 15% off everything in the DRF store this week for President's Day. This President's Day sale available through the weekend. We've got that big 3-day weekend of racing coming up right on through President's Day on Monday. So just use that code PRES25 to get 15% everything off. Store.drf.com is the website. Mike, this Mineshaft drew a field of 8 runners going the mile and a 16th distance on the dirt course, and features the return of last year's Louisiana Derby winner Catching Freedom, who was one of the top 3-year-olds heading into the Kentucky Derby of 2024. He's been off for a long time, but coming back in what seems like a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I like the spot for him coming back. We'll see if he's ready off of a pretty substantial layoff. Haven't seen him since the Ohio Derby. I'm not going to argue with the placement, David. It also feels like he's in a good spot, maybe because he likes to sit and make one run, and there should be pace in front of him here.
Yeah, speaking of the potential pace scenario for this race, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector. And I can't really disagree, Mike. I'm not exactly sure who is going to be in front. Maybe the number 7 Batten Down gets to the lead because he does seem like the one of that quartet that figures to be forwardly placed, or maybe even quintet if you include Maycocks Bay. Batten Down seems like the one that needs the lead to run his best races, but there are others in here that want forward position. You could say a lot of the same things about the number 3, Tuscan Sky. Komorebino Omoide is certainly not slow. And then you've got Hall of Fame and Maycocks Bay who want to be close up as well.
Yeah, I can see this pace getting competitive once again. I think you're right about Batten Down too, David. I mean, at least in my opinion, he needs the lead to be at his absolute best. And I got to believe that Mott and Gaffalione are going to try to get him there right from the start. But then you look at Tuscan Sky down, closer to the inside, and boy, he's a horse who's at his absolute best when he's involved from the start. Anytime he doesn't make the lead, he's run horrific races. I mean, he's probably going to be going too.
Let's go through this field in post-position order, beginning with the number 1, Warrior Johnny. And do note he is cross-entered on turf in the Fairground Stakes. The very next race, we'll see which surfaces Connections ultimately want to run over. Do follow our colleague Marcus Hirsch on Twitter or X if you want to get early indications about where these horses might go. He often gets that information. It'll also be in the articles he writes for this race on DRF.com. Mike, Warrior Johnny is a horse who is coming off a pretty good trip when he was 3rd last time in the Tenacious, but that was a race that hasn't exactly been flattered by runbacks because Saudi Crown came back to disappoint in the Pegasus World Cup next time. Kinetic won his next start, but regressed significantly from a speed figure standpoint. And I know we both like Track Phantom a little bit in the Louisiana Stakes. He was a big disappointment. So I'm kind of wondering how strong that race was and where the graded stakes performance is in Warrior Johnny's past performances that really makes him a contender here.
That's my biggest concern with him too. I'm not quite sure that he's a true graded stakes kind of horse, and so maybe these races are just a little too tough for him. He ran fine last time, but he didn't have an excuse. When he won 2 starts back, it was a much weaker field, and he just got a great trip there into a really contested pace. But I guess with that being said, David, he could get another really good trip here because he's going to sit probably on the inside. They're supposed to be going in front of him. And it's not like he's got races that don't give him some kind of a chance in there. I mean, he's not impossible. I just don't love him.
The number 2 is Heroic Move, who's likely to be one of the bigger prices in this race, one of 2 going out for trainer Robertino Diodoro. He was a big price last time in the Louisiana and picked up some pieces towards the end, but he never really looked like a threat in that race, just kind of rode the rail every step of the way and stayed on without really threatening the top few finishers. He has run some big speed figures in the past and had been competitive with the winner of that last race, Hit Show, in some prior starts. You just never really know what you're going to get from this guy, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's funny too when you go back and watch that Louisiana, because to me there was never a point where it looked like he was going to be competitive, and then all of a sudden they get down to mid-stretch and he's right there, like with a shot at it towards the inside. He wasn't good enough to get the job done. It was a wet track, so maybe you want to use that excuse for him. I don't know. He's another horse who can get the right trip in here. I wasn't convinced he was good enough.
The number 3 is Tuscan Sky. And Mike, I agree with something that you were pointing out with regard to that pace projector. When you look through this horse's past performances, the races in which he is forwardly placed, kind of has that clean face, is battling out of the front end, that's when he consistently runs well. But there are a few races in his past performances, like the Wood Memorial, the Haskell, where he just gets outrun early and just refuses to put in any effort whatsoever. They tried to get aggressive last time in the Harlan's Holiday. He just wasn't quick enough to make the lead there and just didn't seem to react well to being in that that position behind horses. So you don't know what kind of trip he's going to work out in here. And I think that makes him a little bit unreliable, but we do know the talent is there. And we'll take a look at the replay of his Discovery 2 back when he was second to Generous Tipper, but he won the battle, just lost the war this day as he's able to fend off another horse in this race, Batten Down, through some pretty legitimate early fractions. If he runs this race, he's a contender, just hard to trust.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if he runs this race, if he runs his Pegasus that he ran at Monmouth last time, if he runs that race, he's a contender in here. I think you're right to point out, David. It's just he's hard to trust. He's probably not going to be a great price, and so that makes him even harder to really get a handle on in here because you just don't know what you're going to get with him. That race that we just watched right there, he ran huge in there. He hooked up with Batten Down right from the start of that race, dueled him off, and that horse that beat him just got a perfect trip to close him down. I mean, I'm afraid of him in here, and I do think he's a strong contender. I just don't fully trust him.
The number 4 is Hall of Fame. He's actually another horse that participated in that Louisiana Derby last year that was won by Catching Freedom, went to the sidelines after a lackluster effort in that start, but has come back with 2 good performances since returning from a layoff late last year. For Steve Asmussen, won both of his preps for this, a first level and second level allowance race. Now, Mike, he wasn't beating the strongest competition in either of those races, particularly last time when he just dominated that race, going this distance at Fairgrounds, setting a moderate pace up front and drawing away under wraps through the stretch. But he got a big speed figure for the performance, and I kind of wonder if he's a horse that really is showing he needs Lasix to run his best races, because when you start to pick apart his form and take stock of those 2 stakes last year where he was not allowed to run with Lasix, he didn't show up, got back on it for the comeback races, and now as a 4-year-old, he can run with Lasix with this race being run at Fairgrounds.
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up there, David. I mean, it's one of the things you have to reckon with these stakes horses. Sometimes they can run with it, sometimes they can't. This horse gets to run on it, and maybe that is all that he needs. I still kind of want to take a wait and see approach with him, especially if he takes money in here off the big figure. I mean, listen, I don't want to be too hard on him for the stakes tries last year. Maybe it was just a little bit too much too soon for this horse, and there was a long layoff involved. But I don't know how much I'm supposed to like him off of the 2 recent wins. He ran fine in there, and he obviously got the figures, but he was just absolutely loose on the lead last time. He's not getting that trip in here.
The number 5 is Catching Freedom, and he kind of is the key to this race because he showed a high level of ability coming into that Kentucky Derby last year and actually ran pretty well on Derby Day to only lose by a length and a half to the likes of Sierra Leone and Forever Young, who did turn out to be 2 of the better 3-year-olds in that division last year. Now, I thought his last couple of performances were disappointing because he got a pretty good trip in the Preakness, popped out at the top of the stretch like he was going to potentially win that race and didn't really finish it off. And last time in the Ohio Derby, we'll take a look at the stretch run of that race. It was won by today's rival Batten Down. We'll get to him in a little bit, but Catching Freedom once again got a pretty good trip, sitting closer to the pace than usual, and just failed to finish off this race, went to the sidelines after this. And Mike, he's coming off the layoff. I am typically a little concerned about taking short prices in these situations, but we're going to throw up a stat for trainer Brad Cox that I found in DRF Formulator that definitely gives you some confidence that this horse is going to come back with a good effort.
Yeah, the formulator stat that we're going to see for Rebecca. This is kind of crazy. This is crazy stuff here. That it's not even something that I was that aware of. I know Brad Cox has trainer stats that are great across all different kinds of races and layoffs and things. That's an unbelievable number. I just want to say this about Catching Freedom. He was a really good 3-year-old. I was never a particular fan of his. He wasn't one of my favorite horses from that crop last year. That being said, I didn't think there was any way that he could lose the Preakness the way that field shaped up. And I was really disappointed with that performance. Obviously, the Ohio Derby wasn't a good one either. And that's probably why his campaign was over at the end of June. I think Cox just realized that this horse needed some time off. He gave it to him. And now he's coming back in a spot where he can be effective. I'm not a huge fan of this horse, David, but I do expect him to have a good year as a 4-year-old.
One problem I have with this horse, Mike, is I know there was this narrative last year that he wasn't a great workhorse, so maybe I shouldn't put too much into this, but I've watched some of his recent workouts. The last video available on February 2nd, he got badly outworked by an unraced horse. So that is a little bit of a concern for me, but again, he was not a great workhorse last year. The number 6 is Maycocks Bay, and he's another also ran from that grade 3 Louisiana Stakes, and he was a little keen through the early stages, Mike, but ultimately settled into a good trip, stalking on the outside, and he ranged up at the quarter pole like he was going to be a factor in that race and just did not finish it off through the final 1/8 of a mile. And for me, it's hard to bet him back off that performance.
I have the same exact take on him, David. I'm not going to really add anything to that. I don't think the sloppy track was necessarily an excuse for him there. He had a shot at that race and he wasn't good enough, and I just don't want to bet him back off it.
I'm curious to know what you make of the number 7 Batten Down. We already showed the replay of him winning that Ohio Derby. That's several starts back, and his past performances at this point obviously faced some of the toughest 3-year-olds in his division last year in the Jim Dandy and the Travers. Had that easy win at Churchill too back, and obviously could not handle the early pressure from Tuscan Sky in the Discovery last time, but maybe he was starting to feel the effects of a long 3-year-old campaign, having competed for the entire season. I have trouble pegging his overall ability, Mike, and also if I trust what kind of trip he's going to get in this race.
Yeah, I was concerned about both of those things as well. I don't particularly like him in here, David, just because to me, he's a horse who I really do think if he doesn't make the lead, he's just not the same kind of a horse in here. And I think he's going to have a real tough time clearing it here because, like, again, I got to believe Tuscan Sky's going from the inside. So we'll see if he gets the right trip. This is one of the horses that I was against in here, and he'll probably be a relatively short price.
The number 8 is Komorebino Omoide going out for the Robertino Diodoro barn, and he's coming off some pretty good performances, Mike. I mean, he ran that 99 Beyer 3-back and winning the Delta Mile, albeit against weaker competition, but he's validated that number since, and it's not like that was the first time he had run a fast speed figure, running better than I thought he could, going the 6 furlong distance 2-back in the Thanksgiving Classic. And then last time, that was a race in the Louisiana that kind of fell apart towards the end. Not that the pace was that fast, but he was the one that was involved in it that was still fighting it out to the finish. And Hit Show would be one of the favorites if he were coming back in this spot. And Komorebino Omoide fought that rival all the way down to the wire. He's just in great form right now, and it feels like he never gets the respect he deserves from the bettors.
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. But he's another one. He's got a little something to prove here in races like this. So, we'll see if he's up for it here. I did think he ran well last time. Your point about the pace, I guess it's well taken. It's not really the way that I viewed that race. I mean, to me, I know that Hit Show came from last. To me, Hit Show was just much the best in that race. And this horse did his very best up there, and he was only second best. But he ran really, really well. And I expect him to get sort of a similar trip this time, David. He's not going to be on the lead. He's going to be sitting up close, maybe getting first run at some leaders in this race.
Let's throw up our picks for this grade 3 Mineshaft. And Mike, I think we're going in pretty different directions here. Maybe I let that workout video that I saw for Catching Freedom play my mind too much, but I downgraded him a bit in my picks. But if he comes back to his top form, I think he's got to be considered the horse to beat.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that he's a great bet in this race necessarily. I just kept going through the field, David, and I just couldn't find the other horse that I really got myself interested in. The long shots didn't do a lot for me. Tuscan Sky is sort of my other horse, but we talked about the reasons not to trust him at a short price. And, the more I looked at it, I just sort of got tired of it. I was like, I'm not taking a long shot in here. Catching Freedom, if he's ready off the bench, this is a pretty good spot.
Yeah, the horse I'm most afraid of in here is Hall of Fame, who feels like he's been visually impressive in his last couple of starts, gets a class test, but I didn't expect a big price on him either, and I thought at least I'd get decent value on the number 8, Komorebino Omoide, who's going to need some others in here to not run their best races to win, but I think that's a possibility, and he's kind of proven he shows up with a high 90s Beyer every time, so I put him on top, and Mike going with the number 5, Catching Freedom, in the grade 3 Mineshaft on Saturday at Fairgrounds. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.